inheritance and later polymorphism, which is a modification of inheritance, is a relationship. In other words, a human being, a student, is a human being. Now you can see this quite clearly in code with the use of the extends word in Java. So a student extends human being means that a student is a human being, and this method here, this variable here, which is public, will automatically also be available inside the student class. Now this method, which is unspecified, will also be available inside the student class. What am I talking about? This is a constructor. No, another constructor which has been overloaded. This public method, hello, this is going to be available inside the student class, and this public getLastName method is also going to be available. However, these variables, these private variables, will not pass down to the student class. And in other words, if I create a student, as I have done here, it will not have a first name, last name, age, and weight exactly as I can see here, but it will have a get last name and get first name, which you can see here because they're public. Polymorphism is when you do inherit some things, but you change them in some of this one or more of the subclasses. So for example, I have a liquid. All of these methods are public, by the way. A liquid has an add method, a remove method, and a swirl method. So therefore, coffee, milk, and tea, which inherit from liquid, also have those three methods. So if I look first of all at tea, tea will have add from here, it'll have remove from here, it'll have swirl from here, and it'll also have its own method, which is read future. Milk will have add from here, remove, but I can see here that remove has been overridden here, so it will not have the remove from liquid, it'll have its own remove. And finally swirl, the same thing again. Swirl has been overridden, so the only method from liquid that it'll have is add, because it's defined its own remove and its own swirl. Coffee, in this case coffee will have the add from liquid, and it'll also have the remove from liquid, but it has defined its own swirl, so it'll have its own swirl. And finally, the classes which inherit from those subclasses, the ones here, espresso and decaf, let's do those. Add, for example, if I call the add method in espresso, first of all, it's got its own add defined already, so it stops there. If I call the swirl method, it's got its own swirl defined, so it stops there. If I call it's also got a remove method, which is inherited all the way down. If I call its remove method, remove, I say espresso.remove, it'll look at the class above it. Does remove exist here? No, it doesn't, so it'll look at the class above that, and it does there, so the first instance of remove that it finds, searching upwards, it'll execute. Now, decaf, if I call decaf swirl, what is it going to execute? So it looks upwards. The first swirl that it finds, which is defined in coffee, is the one that it uses. It doesn't use the liquid swirl, it uses the first one that it finds. Here's a different example. Two of the methods which the class cat inherits from animal are overridden. Those methods are, of course, sleep, which are overridden from here, and mammal will also override reproduce, and if cat extends mammal, then cat will receive the reproduce from mammal, and it will receive its own hunt mice, and it will have the purr, which is defined itself. Sometimes it can get a little bit confusing, and it's a good exam question, therefore, to include this and super and ask what they mean. Now, there's a difference. If you use this and super with double brackets or with any parameters inside that, that refers to a method, of course. So that runs the constructor, either the constructor of the current class or the constructor of the class which this class extends, the superclass. Whereas the keywords without the brackets just mean the actual instance that you're in the case of this, or super. So in other words, if I want to refer, if I'm in a class called, student, and the instance variable is called A, then what I might say is this dot age, and it would refer to the instance variable of the current instance of my class. Whereas if student extends human being, and human being had a variable which is called species, then I might say super.species, and that would refer to the instance variable of the human being that this class extended. Probably easier to see with some examples. So the word extends is used in Java for inheritance, and a little aside is that all classes in Java automatically already extend, that should be Java, not Jav, java.lang.object. Even though it doesn't say this in their class definition, they all do, and that's where they get all of the other methods like synchronize and class ID variable that they already have. But again, you don't need to mention this, and apart from this one little anomaly, everything else is perfectly clear. Java doesn't allow something called multiple inheritance, or in other words, a class can only extend one other class. Otherwise, I've just told you, it also extends, every class also extends java.lang.object, which you can look at. C++ is a language which allows multiple inheritance. So class A, for example, could extend class B, C, D, and E. And boy, does that get complicated when you have to map out which method is going to be called. Yeah, can be a bit confusing. One of the reasons that Java decided not to do that was to eliminate confusion. Keep it simple. If a method with the same signature and name is implemented in a subclass, then it's called overriding, and especially if the behavior is changed, that's polymorphism. Polymorphism is when an inherited class exhibits slightly different behavior from the behavior that would have been inherited from the superclass. And for example, if you had 5 different types of student, and they all inherited the method work from the parent class student, but one of those types of student worked differently from the other 4, then that would be polymorphism, polymorphic behavior. And finally, this and super can be used to refer to the current instance or the class that extends it, and if they're used with brackets, then they would call the constructors of those 2 classes.